Deafrowe with Deafrowe Closed Captioning, and I'm back again with another review. And this review is for the last episode of The Devil's Hour, called Amor Fati, which is translated to mean love of fate or love of one's fate. It is basically used to describe an attitude in which one sees everything that happens in one's life, including suffering and loss, as a good thing or at very least necessary. So, kind of tells you where this is going with Gideon. The biblical name is Gideon, for someone who basically did not want to give in to his fate, but ended up doing so in the end anyway. Which is kind of where you see this Gideon in that same resemblance. At first, when he started seeing his own memories over and over again, he didn't want to do anything about it, but he realized he had to because, like he alluded to at the very end of the last episode, his dad killed him first. And then he goes on to explain, I've been killed so many times, I can't even count how many times I've been killed in this way. But before I get started on this review of the last episode of The Devil's Hour, please like, subscribe, and share, and hit that notification bell, because there is going to be a season 2 of The Devil's Hour, and at the end of this, I want to go over some of the theories where I think it could go. But without further ado, episode 6 of The Devil's Hour, the final in this season 1, Amor Fati. Now, as you can see, Gideon is talking to them finally. He's giving them, okay, you might want to record this. It's going to be too hard for you to believe. You're going to, record this. Basically, he says, look, I killed my father because he had killed us so many times before in his suicide in retaliation against his mother. And the retaliation was he committed suicide and took the kids with him because the mother had cheated on him with another man. And the reason the mother cheated on him with another man because his mother ended up hating him for the way he was treating her kids or their kids, and the way he was just so angry all the time, losing money and doing things that were unchristian-like, and then going out and telling everybody that they're Christian. It was kind of funny the way you watch this, but you see this timeline right here where he's born, he's a kid, he gets punished several times by the father, they get in a car, they drive off somewhere, and they basically say, Mommy needs us to pray for her soul, and this is the part right here where he basically just takes the car off the cliff with the 2 kids in the back seat and kills all 3 of them. And then it starts all over again. Punished pine. And the pine cone, as you can see here, is a pine cone that was sitting outside of the church. And in a previous timeline, he would pick it up every single time, take it into the church with him, and start playing with it. And that's one of the things that his father would get on to him about, was playing with a pine cone while they were in church. You should be listening to the preacher. So every time they got back from the church that day, he would pull his belt off and take him to his, basically whip his hands with his belt. So one of the first things he did was stop picking up the pine cones, he started changing little things here and there to see if they would work, basically, from a kid's point of view. He basically stopped, try to make his, accidentally making his father mad at him or whatever, but every time it would end up the same way. The father would get the 2 kids, load them up in the car, take them over a cliff, end up committing suicide and killing them both in the process. So finally, he decides, to take matters into his own hands and kills his father at the age of 9 to keep him from killing him and his brother Malcolm. And then Ravi is, of course, like, yeah, thanks for clarifying that, whatever. And, basically he's, messing around with Gideon, trying to make him trip up. But Gideon never trips up on anything. He's got an answer for everything. And Lucy's like, you change things. What do you mean you change things? It's like, well, if I can remember it, I'll write it down. As when I come back, I'll start writing it down immediately, and I'll see the timeline laid out. And then he gives another example where he meets a woman or a girl named Evelyn who's real nice to him. Well, as she walks away, he hears a car wreck, and he goes around the corner and he sees Evelyn's car is basically in the ditch with her family all dead. And he tells Lucy, he's like, so what I did the next time around was I took a knife and blew out their tires before they could leave the driveway. And the wreck never happened. As you can see. Let's see if I can find it right in here. Yeah, right here. So, but the problem with this was, and he goes on to explain, Evelyn, of the family members, Evelyn was the only one that started to notice changes. And she started seeing shadows, started seeing people in the house that were not there. It was basically because she was living in a timeline she hadn't lived in before. And so she was seeing the shadows of a timeline that came before her that were supposed to be in that house or whatever she was supposed to. And then, but it got to the point that he had saved her so many times that she would actually end up taking the tire out herself, and so her family wouldn't pass away. It's like she just instinctively figured out what she had to do that day. And so he no longer had to go over to that house and take that tire out. She was doing it by that time. But the repercussions, like I said, she started seeing shadows and people that were not there. And she thought she was going crazy. And then as she got older, she finally committed herself to a psych ward or whatever. And that's when he finally had to step in and basically pull her out of the psych ward and tell her you're not crazy. And they set up a little house in the middle of nowhere so that she doesn't have to deal with the shadows and the different timelines overlapping in a certain area. Well, if a certain area where people did not live or exist at a certain period of time, she could be free of those shadows and free of seeing just random people all the time, all those ripples all the time. And that's what he's trying to explain to Lucy. You know, and then there's another incident with the, what is it, the dryer, what the drying for the clothes or whatever, and he went around to every house stealing these dryers and throwing them over into this ravine, which is one of the things that Ravi had actually, investigated himself. But Gideon goes on to say, even though I stopped all those fires from happening by, stealing those machines and stuff and throwing them in the ravine, I could still smell the smoke, even though there was no fire. He said, but the way he explained it was, you look at these timelines as a footpath, and this footpath has been very worn in. It's been gone over several times. Well, when I change something, when Gideon changes something, it creates another footpath. Well, that footpath is not as deep as the footpath before, or the loop that happened before, and so you will see those residuals from that original footpath play over and over again. And that's what he tries to explain is that's what was happening with Evelyn is she had created a new path, but she was still seeing that old path because that old path had been there for so long. You don't just get rid of it automatically. There's some residuals that stick around and you will see them. And so that's what he goes on to tell, So Ravi's like, so you think you're a hero? I was like, no, I'm no hero. I'm going along with what I think I'm supposed to be doing. Why else would I remember all this stuff unless I'm supposed to be doing something? And that's the whole thing with one's fate. So, yeah, and Ravi even admits, like in his little list of people, he's got names from, names, dates, past, present, and future. And, there's one part where Ravi's like, if you could predict the future, how do you predict? Can you predict what I'm going to say now? And he said, no, I can't predict everything that's going to happen. There are certain variables that change that I can't fathom. For example, the whole thing with Aiden killing his friend detective. That wasn't supposed to happen. Aiden originally was going to kill a pregnant woman who wasn't paying for her drugs or something like that. But because Detective, what's his name? Detective Holston, or Holston, or whatever his name is. I can't remember all of a sudden. Let me go back here. Yeah, Holness. I keep saying Holness, Holston or whatever, because they got involved with Lucy in the whole Aiden case and started going after and trying to find Mia. Detective Holston raged like Holness or whatever, raised like a little fight up against the gangs, and it changed their perspective of who they needed to kill, basically. Yeah, but fact of the matter is, they stopped him from killing Aiden when he normally would have killed Aiden, and it would have never happened to begin with had he got there and killed Aiden first. So whether Aiden was going to kill a pregnant woman or kill the detective Nick Holness, it all depended. It didn't matter who he was going to kill, but it was the fact that they kept Gideon from getting there at his appointed time for him to kill him, and therefore he carried out a murder of some sort regardless. And he goes on the whole thing about the was it Sloan or whatever his name is, I can't remember, Slade, I keep saying Sloan, Slade, the guy that was murdered in the first episode, the old man. He said, because Ravi's like, we have this laptop that belongs to you, and it has pedophilia stuff on here or whatever. He's like, no, that laptop did not belong to me. That was Slade's laptop. I stole it to see what he was up to, and when I found out what he was up to, I decided to take matters in my own hand, and he had to go. And had he not done that, those two girls would have ended up in that pond behind that where that house is, racked up, dead, and everything else. So he's like, I just did what I had to do. Because he did look at what was on that laptop, and it made Gideon so mad that he couldn't wait to, do a plan up of any sort. He just went after the guy, killed him. So, yeah, here's the part where he's talking about the kid. Now, the kid that was kidnapped 10 years prior, Ravi gets into that with him a little bit. And Gideon is basically saying a lot of people are going to be looking for you. I want to take you to my friend Evelyn, which is the one, like he had said before, that he had to put up somewhere that she couldn't see the ripples. And basically, he's like, yeah, he's doing fine. And he tells Ravi, it's like, this is why I kidnapped that kid. It's because the parents would have murdered him and put him in a shallow grave, as you can see right here. The parents were going to kill him. No, he doesn't give a reason for the killing or anything like that. He just tells them that's what happened, and that was the reason he kidnapped the kid in order to stop it. He puts the kid up with Evelyn in the middle of nowhere so they couldn't, find him. And of course, like the whole thing with Evelyn, and Evelyn seeing people in the house and that kind of thing. And then, the whole thing with Adrian Stenner, he tells him about that, like I just said, if I could have stopped it. And he even goes on to tell you how he met the guy that, in the second episode, I think it is, that you see with the knife in the throat. And he was like banging on the door trying to get into his girlfriend's house that night. That would have ended up with him killing her and the baby. and he Gideon met him in the prison cells. Anyway, when he met him in the prison, he put him on the list. Basically, is what he says. It's like he's not going to kill that woman and that child in the next timeline. And sure enough, he made sure he never got that far. Then he finally asked Lucy the one question he asked her in the previous timeline. What is the most, I guess, I'm trying to find the question here. As you see here, this is the future self in the other timeline. She's got cancer of some sort. And Gideon basically asked her, what is, I'm trying to get I want to get the question right. What's the worst thing that ever happened in your life, basically? And the future Lucy from the different timeline basically told him, my mom committed suicide at this time when I was this young or whatever, and whatever. And so what he does, he basically tells her, like, look, the reason this timeline is this right now, and the reason we're in this room talking together in this interrogation room, which he's like, this never happened in this way before. You don't have a kid. You never had a kid before. In any of the other timelines, you've never had a kid. You've always ended up marrying Ravi. Never had kids, got cancer, blah, blah, blah. That one thing he did by saving her mother, what he did is he went into that house before she could get back to the house that night and took out the firing pin of the shotgun so she couldn't shoot herself. But, like I said, that footpath had been worn down so many times that residual is still there. So Lucy still wakes up at 3:33 on the dot every night or every morning, because that footpath where her mom committed suicide at 3:33 that morning has happened more times than not. So she still wakes up at that time even though her mom didn't commit suicide because he took the firing pin out. But the change is so significant that she ends up with somebody else, which is Mike, and she ends up having a kid. And he's basically saying that kid is a husk, a shell. There's no soul. You know, he hasn't lived timeline after timeline after timeline. He's a footpath that doesn't even exist. It's like a ghost is trying to make a footpath. It doesn't have anything. And that's the reason it's hard for him to hold on to what he sees in his own timeline, and why he slips in and out of timelines like he did. It's because he doesn't have a cemented hold on the timeline that he's in right now, because he was never in one before. And so he's like, you changed it so much by one little thing that I did. I didn't realize it was going to be like this. And now you're having a hard time remembering because things have changed so much. And then he tells her to give her a shoelace. And he tries to explain the whole timeline thing. He's like, look, I was looking at everything the wrong way. I was looking at everything as a straight line. I was looking at it, here a timeline starts, here a timeline stops, and then starts again, stops, starts again. But it's actually more like a loop. And towards the beginning of that loop, it's wound even tighter and tighter and tighter, making the footpaths worn, more worn, and more worn. And so, but every time that loop comes back around, if I change a little bit of something, the loop gets wider. And that's what he's trying to explain with the whole shoestring thing. And so Isaac is a product of him changing Lucy Chambers' timeline by saving her mom. And for Gideon, this is an anomaly, and he swears up and down that this cannot be a real person, and it's basically a shell of a person that should not exist. But and this is just my theory on this, to be honest with you. The only issue I have, the only fault I have with Gideon's little, you know, theory on this being just a husk or whatever, how did everybody else start off as? Someone had to start somewhere. So, is Isaac just a product of something being changed, but is he a new person being made into the timeline? And that's the reason he seems so odd to begin with. But as the timelines start to loop more and more, he gains more composure, more soul, more spirit, whatever you want to call, as he goes along. Because as you see towards the end of this episode, he finally does say, does tell Lucy that he loves him as, you know, the mother and everything else. And the father is being really cold and mean to him and that kind of stuff. And then he leaves like a message on Lucy's phone like, Daddy made me cold and all this other stuff like that. And of course, Mike being a drunk, terrible dad at this point, he can't stand Isaac anymore because he's having memories of him and Lucy having a good time and all this stuff before he showed up and ruined everything. It's like, those are the best 3 years of my life, and now you showed up and I couldn't handle you, and then she basically took her away from me. So, let's get going. And he pours a beer on him and everything. Makes him, you know, cold. Just mean. And so, yeah, Gideon's trying to explain the whole thing with Isaac and everything. And Isaac goes upstairs and puts his shirt on the space heater because he thinks that's going to dry it off. And, you know, it obviously doesn't work out that way. And the other thing, too, I meant to bring this up. They did ask about Connor, the one from the previous episode that Gideon shot in the back. What Gideon was doing was experimenting with Connor by having him tied to a chair watching porn with rotten meat with maggots sitting next to him. Apparently, Connor in this timeline rapes 5 women. And what Gideon was trying to do was he kidnapped Connor and put him in this little thing and started making him, basically he was trying to make him hate sex. And by doing that, he figured by the time the next timeline came around, some of that residual would be left over and he wouldn't feel like, you know, raping some women. But yeah, Connor was just basically a Gideon experiment. He was trying to see if he could get him to straighten up by the next time, you know, the loop came back around. So we get to the end here. Gideon escapes, of course. And, yeah, Lucy gets back to the house. And, of course, the house is on fire. Mike didn't do anything to try to save the kid, obviously. And Lucy runs in trying to find him. Can't find him anywhere, and she's starting to see another timeline inside the house as well. And it's the other timeline with the Warrens on the house and not her. And she's seeing their stuff on fire when she's going in the house. She gets all the way to the room and she can't find Isaac. Because in my opinion, Isaac's not in this timeline anymore. Like I said, he slipped into another timeline before. What's to say he didn't do it this time at the end of this episode to leave you off in a little bit of a cliffhanger. But for some reason, Lucy decides to stay in the house and just kind of, I guess, let herself die unless somebody comes in there and saves her at the last minute. You won't know until the next season starts. Anything's possible. But towards the end, they start showing you this other timeline where she's married to Ravi and everything else. And she's also not only married to Ravi, but she is also a detective herself. And she's coming up on the house that is burning, which belongs to the Warrens. And she sees the Warrens over there in the ambulance and realizes she's been here before. You know, this type of deal. And it's like she can't help herself but keep going after Gideon, and neither can Ravi. It's like they can't help themselves but keep going after him. And the events always happen in the same way, with Gideon getting caught and getting out or getting put in prison. He did say the last time he let himself be put in prison for 25 years in order for her to talk to him. So, from here on out, does Gideon let himself be caught anymore? Knowing now, will he continue to save her mom every time the timeline comes back around, because he sees what happened when he did it the first time? Maybe he doesn't do it anymore because he sees that there's too many repercussions for doing that, too many ripples if he does it. So leaving it like it is and letting the mom kill herself, and Lucy becomes a detective instead of a child services lady. I don't know. That's just my theory. I think this next season is going to be definitely weirder, maybe. You never know. In my theory on where the next season should go, or where it does go, I honestly think they'll keep following Gideon down this path, and Lucy, and Isaac could end up showing up in child services, and Ravi be the one that's in the child services, as the boss there, instead of Lucy, and then Lucy is the detective, and they end up meeting up again because this kid Isaac out of the blue says, "Hey, I want my mommy," and he's pointing at Lucy, and Lucy's like, "I'm not your mommy," that kind of ordeal. But she feels like some type of attachment to him, or some memory of him, or something. And I can see that playing out, and Gideon trying to stop that from happening, maybe, or trying to track Isaac down, because Isaac is slipping through different timelines. But Isaac can do something, whereas Gideon can't. He can go to timelines that have happened before, whereas Gideon can only go forward. Whereas Isaac can maybe, and this is theorized again, this is just me theorizing, Isaac can maybe go backwards in the timelines. That's something that Gideon cannot do. So, just something I'm thinking off the top of my head. Be cool to see where they go with this on season 2. Hopefully they keep the momentum up with the way this sci-fi element of this works out, because so far that's what's kept me attached to this show. I've watched the show now 3 times, and each time I find something different I didn't see before. So, very good show. I enjoyed all 6 episodes of The Devil's Hour. Here's to hoping season 2 is just as good, if not better, than season 1. If you look in the link description below, you'll see my critic list score. You can click on that link, go out there to see my critic list score. That score could change with season 2 coming in. If season 2 is better, it could go up. If season 2 is worse than season 1, it could go down. Let's wait to see what Amazon pulls off with this. Hopefully they don't screw it up like they've, screwed other things up. You never know. But so far, so good. The Devil's Hour. And that's my review. All 6 episodes of The Devil's Hour. Go back and watch them. Pretty good. And that is Deafrowe. Well, I'll catch you out on another on the other edge. Messed that up. I'm sorry. I'll catch you out on the edge of another review. Deafrowe out.